The mountains were quiet that September morning, the kind of silence that felt unnatural, as though the landscape itself was holding its breath. Park Ranger Alex Turner had walked the same trail countless times. Yet that day the melting glacier revealed something the Earth had hidden for nearly 3 decades. At first, it looked like scattered debris, torn fabric caught in ice, scraps of metal jutting out like bones. But as Alex stepped closer, his boots crunching against the brittle frost, he realized it wasn't trash. Half buried beneath the translucent blue was a weathered backpack, its strap stiff with ice, its color drained by time. Nearby, the collapsed remains of a sleeping bag clung to the glacier wall like a moth frozen mid-flight. Alex crouched, brushing the frost from a rusted cooking pot. His stomach tightened. It wasn't just the gear itself, it was the placement. Items clustered together, as though an entire camp had been swallowed whole. The glacier had kept its secret well, sealing away whatever story these belongings once told. He pulled out his radio, voice unsteady. "Base, this is Turner. You're going to want to see this." The air seemed colder as he waited for the reply, his breath fogged in short bursts, each exhale merging with the mountain mist. Behind him, the glacier groaned, water trickling down like tears. The Sierra Nevadas were shifting, thawing, and in their unraveling they had unearthed ghosts. When the second ranger arrived, Alex pointed silently to the frozen bundle. Together they stood, not speaking for several moments. There was a reverence to the discovery, as though words might disturb the fragile line between the past and present. "Could be from that group," the other ranger finally murmured. Alex didn't answer. He knew exactly what his colleague meant. In 1986, 5 hikers had vanished without a trace, their disappearance leaving families haunted, their case files gathering dust in local archives. Rumors had lingered for years, but with no bodies, no belongings, the story had faded into half-forgotten legend. Until now. The men began marking the site, careful not to disturb the relics. Behind them, the glacier continued its slow retreat, revealing slivers of fabric, flashes of metal, as though the mountain itself was unwilling to give up all its secrets at once. And yet, one thing was certain. This was only the beginning. News traveled faster than the mountain winds. Within days, local papers carried headlines about the frozen discovery, their bold fonts dragging a 3-decade-old mystery back into the public eye. For most, it was just another eerie story in the back pages. But for a handful of families, the words felt like knives reopening wounds that had never fully healed. Reporters scrambled through old archives, pulling faded photographs of 5 smiling young adults in hiking gear. Their names, once whispered with grief, now returned to the public. Daniel Reed, the confident leader with an easy smile. Claire Donovan, the young woman with restless eyes who had once promised a life back home to someone waiting. The other 3 names remained for now, shadows in the background, faces to be reintroduced as the story unfolded. Detectives who had worked the original case were interviewed, their voices tinged with bitterness. "We had nothing back then," one retired officer admitted. "No bodies, no gear, no signs of foul play. It was like the mountain swallowed them whole." For the families, the discovery stirred memories they had buried deep. Claire's younger sister, now gray-haired, confessed to a reporter outside her home. "We always believed she'd come walking back one day. Seeing her name in print again, it hurts more than I expected." Meanwhile, Alex Turner, the ranger who found the gear, sat in a briefing room as investigators cataloged photographs of the frozen belongings. The items were mundane: pots, ropes, sleeping bags, yet each object was heavy with implication. Whose hands had once carried them? Whose last breaths lingered in the cold fabric? One photograph stood out, a cracked compass etched with initials barely visible through frost. Dr. Daniel Reed. A leader once admired, now reduced to a relic locked in ice. The discovery had given the hikers their names back. But names alone were not enough. What the world wanted, what the families demanded, were answers. And somewhere, beneath the layers of silence, the truth waited to be unearthed. The discovery of the hikers' belongings grew darker when investigators unzipped a frost-stiffened pouch tucked deep inside one of the packs. Inside lay a small sealed film canister, its plastic brittle from decades of cold. Forensic technicians treated it like treasure, rushing it to a lab where, against all odds, the images inside survived. Days later, the developed photographs lined a table in the county sheriff's office. grainy, washed in the faded hues of the 1980s. The pictures revealed fragments of the group's final days. The first few were ordinary enough. The hikers smiling awkwardly at the trailhead, Daniel Reed standing tall in the center, his arm draped casually around Claire Donovan's shoulders. To the untrained eye it seemed friendly, but to those who knew the touch carried something else, an intimacy that didn't belong. Especially not with Claire's fiancé, Mark Holloway, standing just 2 feet away, forced into the edge of the frame with a tight, hollow grin. Other images showed the group trekking along ridges, campfires glowing faintly at dusk, laughter frozen in time, yet the progression grew unsettling. Claire's smile thinned. Mark's gaze hardened. Daniel's confidence seemed to swell, his presence commanding more of each frame, as though the camera itself bent toward him. Then came the final photograph. It was blurred. The figures caught mid-motion, faces half-turned, eyes sharp with something that was not joy. Claire stood with her mouth open as though arguing. Mark's hand gripped a trekking pole too tightly. Daniel loomed between them, his expression unreadable, but his stance, broad, challenging, spoke volumes. In the background, 2 others lingered, shadows watching, caught between choosing sides. The sheriff stared at the photo for a long time. "This wasn't just a hike," he muttered. Alex Turner, who had been invited to observe, felt a chill crawl through him that had nothing to do with the glacier. These were not simply lost adventurers. There was tension here, a fracture running through the group long before the storm hit. The photo didn't answer what had happened in 1986, but it hinted, in its grainy imperfection, at something darker than misfortune. It suggested conflict, betrayal, and it demanded the question what had happened after the shutter clicked. The Sierra Nevadas in the summer of 1986 were alive with cicadas and heat, the air buzzing with a deceptive calm. The 5 hikers had set out with eager steps, unaware that every mile carried them closer to a fracture none of them could mend. Daniel Reed led the way, his strides long, his confidence unshakable. To strangers he was magnetic, a natural leader, but within the group his charisma was also a kind of gravity, pulling everything and everyone toward him. His voice carried over the crunch of boots. "Keep up, people. We'll hit the ridge by sundown." Behind him, Claire Donovan adjusted her pack. Her smile was faint, weary, yet it lingered whenever Daniel glanced back at her. She was 24, engaged, and should have been tethered by certainty. Instead, she walked between 2 worlds, the promise of a home with Mark, and the dangerous thrill of Daniel's attention. Mark Holloway trudged several steps behind, his silence louder than any complaint. His jaw tightened each time Daniel's laughter rang out. To him, this hike was supposed to be a shared adventure, a memory carved before marriage. Yet every gesture between Claire and Daniel chipped at his resolve, his anger fermenting quietly beneath the sun. The other 2, Sarah Mitchell and Ethan Ward, tried to bridge the spaces between. Sarah, Daniel's childhood friend, carried her loyalty like armor, defending his arrogance with light-hearted banter. Ethan, reserved and thoughtful, observed more than he spoke. His eyes lingered on details. The way Mark's fists clenched when Daniel joked, the way Claire's gaze darted away from questions. By the 3rd day, the mood had shifted. The laughter that once echoed off granite walls dulled into sharp exchanges. Claire snapped at Sarah over a misplaced map. Mark refused to help set camp, his silence heavy with accusation. Daniel, as always, smoothed the edges, but even his charm was thinning, cracking under the weight of unspoken truths. At night, the wilderness pressed in. Firelight flickered over tense faces, conversations clipped and fragile. Ethan wrote quietly in a small journal, his words careful, private, as though he already sensed the fragility of the group. The trail stretched endlessly ahead, but the hikers' bond frayed with every step. They weren't just battling the wilderness, they were battling one another. Somewhere between the laughter of the first day and the silence of the 4th, something irreversible had begun to take shape. And soon, under the dark canopy of the mountains, it would surface. By the 5th evening, the mountains no longer felt welcoming. Clouds gathered over the peaks, thick and brooding, as the group pitched their tents in a narrow clearing. The air smelled of rain, sharp and metallic. They circled the fire, its glow weak against the encroaching dark. Sparks drifted upward like fragile prayers, vanishing into the black sky. Conversation faltered until Daniel broke the silence. Tomorrow we'll push through the valley, he said, voice steady, almost commanding. If we leave early, we'll be in the clear before the storm hits. Sarah nodded, though exhaustion tugged at her features. Ethan, hunched over his journal, said nothing. Claire shifted uneasily, her eyes catching Daniel's across the flames. She wanted to speak, to confess the weight pressing on her chest, but Mark's gaze was heavy beside her, cold and unyielding. The silence stretched until she forced a brittle smile. We'll make it, she said, though her voice wavered. Mark finally spoke, his words sharp enough to cut through the night. We'll make it if people remember why we're here. His eyes flicked toward Daniel, the accusation unspoken but unmistakable. Daniel leaned back, smirking, refusing to be rattled. We're here to finish what we started, Mark. Don't turn it into something it's not. The tension clung to the air like static. Sarah quickly interjected, laughing too loudly, trying to smother the hostility. We're all just tired. Tomorrow will be better, but the firelight betrayed them. Claire's trembling hands, Mark's clenched jaw, Daniel's calculated calm. Ethan recorded it all silently in his journal, though his pen paused longer than usual, as if even he couldn't find the right words. The first drops of rain hissed against the fire, dimming its glow. A gust of wind tore through the clearing, making the tent shudder. Claire rose abruptly, muttering, I need air, though the mountain already breathed heavily around them. She disappeared into the shadows beyond the firelight. Mark's stare followed her until she vanished. Daniel's eyes did too, but for an entirely different reason. The storm broke soon after, rain lashing against nylon walls. But inside those tents another storm churned, one that no shelter could contain. Rain hammered the valley as though the sky itself had cracked open. The hikers' tent strained under the weight of water, nylon snapping in the wind. Lightning split the night into violent fragments, revealing faces pale and tight with fear. Inside one tent, Daniel zipped his jacket, eyes glittering in the brief flashes of light. We need to move higher, he shouted over the storm. The riverbed will flood. Sarah shook her head. We can't move in this. We'll lose the trail. Claire sat huddled, her hair plastered to her face, hands trembling around her flashlight. She wanted to believe someone, anyone, but the voices clashing around her made every choice feel like disaster. Mark finally snapped. You always think you know best, Daniel. Always. His words weren't just about the storm anymore. Daniel's jaw tightened, but his smirk lingered, even now. You'd rather sit here and drown? Mark shoved him, sudden and violent. For a heartbeat, the tent seemed too small to contain them. Sarah grabbed Mark's arm, pleading, Stop it, both of you. Outside, Ethan stood motionless in the downpour, journal pressed to his chest beneath his coat. He heard the shouting through the fabric walls, but his feet refused to move. He watched the storm tear at the valley, trees bending, water rising, and he knew something inside the group was breaking just as violently. Claire burst from the tent, stumbling into the storm. Enough! She screamed, though her voice was swallowed by thunder, tears mixed with rain, her chest heaving. She turned toward Mark, then Daniel, then away, unable to choose. Lightning lit the valley again, freezing them in stark tableau. Daniel reaching for her, Mark gripping the pole of the tent like a weapon, Sarah frozen with terror, Ethan standing apart in shadow. Then came the sound, a single, piercing scream. It was swallowed almost instantly by the storm, yet it lingered in every mind, echoing across the valley long after the thunder rolled away. By dawn, the clearing was empty. The tents collapsed, gear scattered, footprints dissolved in mud and rushing water. The ranger at the nearby station remembered seeing them that evening, drenched but alive, Daniel joking loudly as he signed the logbook. That was the last official record. After that night, the hikers vanished. The mountains closed around their absence, keeping it secret for 29 years. The press swarmed the sheriff's office as investigators revealed the recovered gear. Headlines screamed of murder in the mountains, though no official statement used the word. Still, the items, slashed fabric, rusted knives, dark stains preserved in ice, fed the fire of speculation. Families of the vanished hikers were summoned for interviews. Some came reluctantly, others trembling with anticipation, as though the glacier might finally answer decades of torment. Claire Donovan's sister, Marianne, clutched a faded photograph outside the courthouse. Her voice broke as she faced the cameras. Claire wasn't reckless. She wasn't careless. Something happened to her, something no one wanted to admit. Daniel Reed's brother defended him with equal ferocity. He was a leader, not a monster. People loved to hate him, but he'd never let harm come to Claire or anyone else. His eyes hardened at the mention of Mark Holloway. If you want to talk about temper, talk about him. The Holloway family recoiled at the accusation. Mark's sister Ruth told a reporter, "He told me once if he couldn't have her, no one would." I thought he was joking. But after all this, her words trailed, heavy with implication. Detectives reopened the case files, poring over yellowed notes. Theories from 1986 resurfaced. A storm-induced accident, starvation, hypothermia, yet the recovered evidence refused to fit cleanly into accident. Knife slashes on sleeping gear, blood traces in the soil, tension captured in that last haunting photograph. One investigator leaned across the table during a briefing. If this was an accident, then why do the belongings look staged, almost hidden? Someone wanted them gone. Someone wanted silence. Alex Turner sat in the corner, still haunted by the glacier's groan as he'd found the gear. He felt the weight of every headline, every accusation pressing against him. These weren't just names from old case files anymore. They were people who had loved, betrayed, fought, and disappeared. And the mountain, silent for nearly 3 decades, was finally beginning to speak. The evidence lab smelled of chemicals and cold metal, a sterile contrast to the wild, frozen place where the artifacts had been found. Each item from the glacier was laid out under fluorescent lights, tagged and photographed, transformed from relics of adventure into exhibits of suspicion. Technicians leaned over the torn sleeping bag first. At a glance, it could have been shredded by years of ice, but under magnification, the truth emerged. Clean punctures, the unmistakable signature of a blade. The discovery sent a ripple through the room. Nearby, a cooking pot was swabbed for residue. What came back was faint but damning. Traces of blood, too degraded for DNA, yet undeniable in its presence. A rusted knife was found, its handle cracked but still bearing the ghost of fingerprints too blurred to identify. The sheriff reviewed the reports in silence. Every page eroded the old accident theory. This wasn't nature reclaiming the careless. This was violence buried under snow and silence. Word of the findings leaked to the press and speculation roared louder than ever. Some claimed Daniel had snapped, leading the group into madness. Others whispered that Mark, driven by jealousy, had turned the valley into a private battlefield. A few suggested a pact gone wrong, secrets too heavy for young lives to carry. For Alex Turner, the ranger who had stumbled onto it all, the lab reports hit differently. He remembered the way the gear had clustered together, almost arranged. He hadn't wanted to believe it then, but now the thought returned. Sharper. Someone had tried to erase what happened. To hide it in ice, detectives pinned photographs to a board, the slashed fabric, the blurred final photo, the compass with Daniel's initials. Each piece deepened the darkness instead of bringing clarity. The sheriff's voice was heavy as he closed the file. This wasn't an accident. It was survival turned into betrayal, and betrayal turned into silence. Outside, the press demanded answers. But inside the investigation, one fact had become inescapable. 5 hikers had gone into the valley together. Not all of them had left it alive. The call came quietly, almost overlooked. A hospice nurse reporting that one of her patients wanted to speak with investigators. The man was frail, his body thinning under illness. But his name carried weight. Ethan Ward, the last hiker unaccounted for, long presumed dead. Detectives rushed to the facility, their doubts colliding with grim curiosity. Ethan lay in a dim room, machines humming softly around him. His eyes, clouded with age, still carried the haunted depth of someone who had seen too much and said too little. When asked why he had stayed silent all these years, Ethan coughed, his voice a rasp. Because I was a coward, and because the truth destroys more than it saves. The room fell silent, the weight of his words pressing against every wall. He closed his eyes, drifting for a moment before forcing himself back. It started with Daniel. He liked control over the hike, over us, over her. Claire tried to end it that night, to walk away. Mark saw, and it broke something inside him. The storm didn't kill us. We killed each other. He paused, his hands trembling against the sheets. Mark snapped first. He struck Daniel. Claire screamed. Sarah tried to stop it, but Daniel fought back. Knives came out. It was chaos, pure chaos. Detectives leaned closer. And you? Ethan's eyes glistened. I froze. I watched. When it ended, 2 were dead. Claire, She ran into the storm. I never saw her again. Maybe she fell. Maybe she wanted to disappear. His voice cracked. I should have told someone. But I buried it. I hid what was left, hoping the ice would keep the secret. The machines beeped steadily, each sound sharper in the silence that followed. Ethan looked at the detectives, his lips trembling. I carried their ghosts for 29 years. Don't let them be forgotten. Even monsters deserve their names remembered. Hours later, Ethan slipped into unconsciousness, never to wake again. The confession was incomplete, fractured like the glacier that had preserved the evidence, but it was enough to shatter the illusion of accident forever. The truth had finally clawed its way out of the dark. The case file, once buried beneath decades of dust, now sat open on the desks of investigators. Ethan's confession, fragmented and heavy with regret, rewrote everything. What had once been logged as a tragic disappearance was now recognized as a violent unraveling of trust, love, and survival. The press swarmed, hungry for answers. Families of the lost listened to the recording of Ethan's final words, their faces etched with conflicting emotions, relief, anger, sorrow, each reaction tangled in the web of time. For some, the truth was a cruel gift. For others, it reopened wounds that had barely scabbed over. Mark's family mourned not just his death, but the fury that consumed him. Daniel's relatives bristled at his legacy of control, uncertain how to reconcile the man they loved with the manipulator Ethan described. For Sarah, remembered as the peacemaker, there was only grief that her kindness had been drowned out by violence. And Claire, the one who vanished into the storm, remained a question mark, her fate unresolved, her ghost still wandering the glacier's endless white. The Sierra Nevadas returned to their silence. The glacier, retreating inch by inch, kept its remaining secrets frozen in its depths. Tourists came and went, snapping photos, unaware of the blood that had once stained the snow beneath their boots. Detectives filed the case closed, though it felt less like closure and more like surrender. The truth was partial, frayed, and unprovable. No bodies were recovered, no weapons unearthed, only Ethan's dying words to stand against the silence of the ice. In the end, the mountain remained what it always had been, vast, cold, indifferent. It had watched 5 young hikers climb its ridges in 1986, and it had swallowed their story whole. Decades later, it returned fragments, a torn sleeping bag, rusted gear, a confession whispered in the dark, the rest it kept. As the sun dipped behind the peaks, casting long shadows across the snow, it became clear that some mysteries don't end. They simply fade into the landscape, carried forever by the wind that whispers through the pines.